Hey everyone, I'm Aaron Potratz.
And I'm Nathan Hawkins.
We are the Shrink Think
Think
Podcast.
baby.
Enjoy the show.
Go ahead. Live on air for the world to see.
the world of 23 people. Just wait till we go viral. Boom!
That might make it viral.
Yeah, that's it.
Go ahead and say what you want to say.
Yeah, exactly. Whatever it is.
Oh, I didn't realize you were watching. Whoops.
Look at these dum-dums thinking, that's going to, oh my gosh. I'm just thinking of how it goes viral and then it gets made fun of. I don't need that. We're going to be really mundane.
You don't need that at all. Here we go. Here we go again. Hey everyone, welcome to the Shrink Think Podcast. We are very excited to be here again with you. We're always excited. We never stop being excited because we love what we do. We actually, this episode is going to sound boring, but I want to encourage you to stay with it.
It's not boring!
Because we're always excited. We will make boring stuff exciting.
Still not boring!
Still not, never boring. Never bored on this show, ever. Because if it was, we would have to stop recording.
Even an Enneagram 7 is going to love this show.
That's right. We are going to be talking about why a good assessment matters in therapy. So, okay, please don't put your hand back. Don't turn it off. You're like,
No.
boring. Nope.
You got this far. Stay with it.
I'm going to go back to my whatever romantic audiobooks or my whatever
Romantic
what are
audio.
those
Docuseries, podcast.
none of those like serial killer documentary
Yeah, true
things.
crime.
True crime, that's the one. Yeah.
Yeah.
You can do that later. This is important.
Actually, this will help you understand how the true crime in the very beginning, because you're listening to an investigation, right? That's the whole point.
That's right.
That's what an assessment is. An investigation. We should make that like that because it's more sexy that way.
An investigation.
Yeah.
I don't think anybody wants to go to therapy to be investigated. Oh, welcome, Nathan. Where were you on the night of February 4th, 2021?
Man, those lights work too. I'll tell them anything they want to know.
Oh, you want this coffee? Answer the question. So an assessment is essentially like the beginning part of therapy. You go to therapy because you've got a problem in your life. You want to get better. You want something fixed, or you want some insight or some skills or whatever the case may be. Before you get to that, a therapist has to kind of do a full background assessment on you, your life, some of the different factors in your life that might be contributing to this. Maybe some of the symptoms that you're experiencing, because they need to get a pretty good picture about what's going on. So that's an assessment, right? It's sort of a simple evaluation of your current circumstances that brought you here today.
Okay, you have actually been doing assessments your whole life already. I'll tell you that.
I have been?
Nope.
It's
Our
true. I have
clients
been
have.
in the
You
field
probably
for a
have to.
while doing
Nope.
a lot of assessments.
Think about this. Remember when not you, Aaron, but our audience, this is going to take them a little camper story right now. You were 8 years old and you walked up to that ditch with the water in it and you're like, I'm going to jump it. What did you do? You had to assess it. Even at 8 years old, you had to be like, well, how far can I actually jump? What happens if I jump and land in the water? Do I care about that? Will the ground support the other side where I land? I'm not going to slide in like a big pile of mud back into that water. Do I need to run, or can I just stand here and do it? You've been assessing. Gotcha! It's been happening your whole life. Clinicians just do it with your brain and your mind, and hopefully their brain. So that's what we're really talking about, is just trying to understand how, when you are coming in as a client, what matters? What is it? What's the problem? What do you think the problem is? What's contributing to the problem? And ultimately, what matters on how things are going to move forward? Because I'm going to give one example, like of a real thing that kind of happens a lot. So on my assessment, coming in some states, by the way, you are required to have what's called like an informal assessment or an actual assessment, or insurance companies won't even pay for it. It just needs to be in the file type of a thing, which is also why as a client, you're doing all that information, or the clinician's doing information gathering. There's a wide variety of what people do for information gathering. And honestly, your clinician probably has either got an assessment from a place that they're just using, or they've got an assessment from the place they're using and they've changed it, or they totally made it up on their own based on how they work. And that's kind of what I did. I gathered some different things, and I work a lot with trauma. So I have a question inside of this that people answer like in a checked box scenario that says, have you ever not recognized yourself in the mirror? And the question's trauma related. I'm not going to get into all of why, but people will check that box. So as a therapist, I look at it, and if I see that box, I'm like, okay, well, there's definitely possible trauma here. But I got to ask, what do you mean? You checked this, what do you mean? And I would say almost all the time the person's like, I felt so bad. I looked in the mirror and I was like, this isn't even you anymore. And like, okay, that's not what that means, and I don't need to care about that. But if you just look at it, just look at the assessment and then kind of idea, you need to actually go through it to see why the person is answering the way that they're answering on this.
Yeah, so
I just dumped that on Aaron.
like, you talk now. I'm like,
right. Yeah, you.
Okay. End of story. Your turn. So going back to the question here, why does a good assessment matter? Because in therapy, if you're going to get anywhere, you need to make sure that you understand what's going on accurately, correctly, and in some ways I would say like comprehensively, meaning there are a certain number of factors that might be affecting why you're struggling or what's going on. So for example, if somebody comes in and they've got some anxiety, they're just it's in some social situations or some things at work. I've got a presentation coming up and I've got some anxiety about it. You might be thinking as a therapist, okay, that makes sense. I mean, that's a stressful kind of a thing to do, or you're going to be in front of groups and you feel insecure, whatever. That makes a lot of sense. If you don't do a full assessment, if you don't do a thorough assessment, you might miss that there was something that happened in this person's upbringing related to having to like stand in front of mom and dad and like give an account for every single day why they were late to school or why they did not get good grades in school. And so it's not just I have some anxiety about doing this normal thing that everybody has a lot of anxiety around. It's actually linked with a tremendous amount of shame and disappointment in disappointing my parents. And so the weight and the gravity of this is much heavier, and the roots of this issue go much deeper than just the surface of like, okay, well, we just need to give you some like, grounding, relaxation techniques. No, you might actually have some really deep-seated core beliefs about yourself that are rooted in these really powerful experiences that need to actually be addressed. So the assessment then, a good assessment, is going to find that information and connect it to the current symptoms that you're experiencing and even how it's impairing your functioning. And then the good assessment is also going to be able to differentiate between, we're just going to do some maybe CBT, cognitive behavioral therapy. If you don't know what that is, we've got some episodes back in like
45.
Yeah, 45 to 50-ish, where we talk about the different types of therapy. It's a really common one, just looking at some of your thinking and your beliefs and your actions. It's good, it's effective, but it doesn't necessarily go deep like trauma work does. So it can help you, a good assessment can help differentiate between something that looks like common anxiety where CBT can treat it pretty effectively versus, no, actually you've got some deep-seated attachment trauma that might actually need some greater intervention.
So on the client side, and you guys that are normal listeners, that are just normal people, thank God for you, because we are not normal, just kidding. So, meaning me and Aaron, actually.
That's very true. Never been called normal in my life.
So, if you're filling it out when you go to therapy, it can actually feel like, man, kind of judgmental and really like potentially shaming. You're looking at like something that says like, I was spanked as a child, or like the things are thrown at me. I mean, those are questions I've seen on assessments, and if that's you, that's true, you might be like looking at it going like, oh, well, that is true, but I don't want to write it down because I don't feel like it affected me, right, or whatever. Like, I've worked through it, that kind of thing. What my encouragement to you is like, no, just check the stupid box. You can talk about that. The therapist will probably ask about it as an example, but it also kind of does a better job for the therapist to understand what's coming on, to paint the picture. So oftentimes this happens big time in couples therapy. I mean, it's like so often one partner doesn't really want to go to the couples therapy. So the assessment gets sent out to both people, and the partner that doesn't really want to go basically just doesn't check anything, and it says on mine it goes no answer, no answer, no answer, no answer, no answer. Like
one symptom.
Like, well, I know what the answer is. You don't want to be here. Like that. So now
I know what your problem is.
Exactly.
That one's very clear.
Right. So it is kind of still an assessment, But I'm encouraging, like, look, okay, so if you are in that scenario, you don't really want to go. Well, do you want me to all of a sudden just know that about you up front? Like, you can tell me that you can write in the document somewhere, I don't really want to be going. I don't really want to do this. I've tried to fill this out the best way that I can. I don't feel like some of this applies to me or whatever. So it's kind of the statement that because ultimately, I would say at this point in our therapeutic development as a society, that most likely the therapist is getting this assessment electronically, which means they're getting this assessment before you even show up, which is really helpful. They're able to look at it before you are there.
So let's clarify here, because we're talking in two different ways about an assessment.
Okay.
An assessment can be like intake paperwork. It can be electronic forms that you fill out about some of your upbringing, some of your demographics, maybe some family or symptoms that you're experiencing, traumas that you experience. So it can be paperwork that you fill out, and an assessment is also the interview process in the first couple of sessions that the therapist is doing with you in person or over video, if that's how you're doing it, to kind of go over that same information or find out more about that information. So I think you're using the assessment in both ways.
So let's think about it like this. Like, what's happening is the intake paperwork is like the client, you, the normal person, doing an assessment on yourself, right? The therapist, because they're providing you this information, these questions, they are saying, this is what we need to assess what's going on. Right? So you put in information because you look at yourself when you're at getting these questions, and you're assessing whether or not they actually apply to you, right? So then you're checking it. Then when you get into the session, the therapist will join you in that assessment and make sure they understand your assessment, and then they will, on top of it, make an assessment of their own.
So, for example, when you were saying that, I was thinking that I just went to my doctor for my annual physical over the summer, and there are some forms that I fill out or some boxes that I check as I'm, before I'm going to this thing. And a lot of my information saves over from year to year, but it's things like, do you have any of these symptoms or any of these medical issues? And so I could check this one or that one, and the doctor can be like, oh, you checked this one. Like, tell me about that. And I can answer and say, oh, well, yada, yada, this is my explanation. And to me, it might seem like it's no big deal. So that's my assessment, right? But the doctor is the one providing me I wouldn't have known, to say like, I have glaucoma. I don't even know what that is. I don't have it, but like, I wouldn't even know to check that, because as I'm going through it, I'm like, do I have glaucoma? And I asked my dad, I'm like, do we have like a family history? Like, it's good because like you're stimulated to think about some of these areas of your life that you might not realize could be related. So you check those boxes like, okay, I guess, I do have this thing, or I've experienced this before, or in the past few months, yeah, I have, had this thing. And so then I can tell my doctor, and my doctor can then ask more information about that. and determine, is this really a big deal? Is it connected to anything? Could it be connected to anything? Or is it probably just like, okay, that's not a big deal, right? Like a lot of people have that. Just want to know, because if something else does come up, we could determine that this is maybe a factor that is related or contributing to it. So again, this assessment is really helping us to understand what's going on and what's feeding into the nature of the problem that you're presenting with.
Yeah, there's as this thing goes back and forth, it is important to do that, because to really kind of do a good assessment, and essentially what that means is just to get all the way through it from point A to point B, and the therapist is using your paperwork coming in, and then also just you talking, to try to understand that, but to get all the way through something before you decide, okay, this is what we're going to do.
And so on that note, a good assessment, like why does a good assessment matter, right? Because it's helping to, it's focused on trying to see all the things that could be going on and all the contributing factors. And that means that in that process, a good therapist needs to also really know the actual true information. And that can be really uncomfortable for you if you're a client, because you might have some stuff that you checked off on your intake, or you might have some information about what's been going on that you feel embarrassed about, or you feel ashamed about, or maybe you haven't told anybody. And that's not to say that you need to go into this session and tell them like, oh yeah, I was raped when I was, 9 years old or something. You don't need to go into the details of that. That's not what I'm saying. But there might be some things going on in terms of some of your behavior patterns or some of the experiences that you've had that you do need to put in front of a therapist so that they can accurately understand, oh, you did have maybe a sexual trauma when you were younger, and that might actually contribute to some of the marital problems that you're having right now, for example. So it's uncomfortable, right? But if you put all that information in front of a good therapist with a good assessment, they can accurately understand what's going on and best be able to help you so that you no longer have to struggle with that.
So, yeah, a lot of times I think what you average Joe folks and normal people come with is this idea that, well, I know what I want to work on, so I don't need to talk about these other things, right? I don't want to do that. Okay, so what I would encourage you to do is, if you have already worked on it with another therapist and you feel like it actually is behind you, just say it. Like, there's usually typically somewhere on these documents to write some information down, and just simply write like, had trauma as a child, worked on it with therapist back, and just put the years down that was there. So the therapist knows like, okay, this is a thing. It's probably not a big thing. It might not be a contributing factor at all. But also by you saying that, if the therapist realizes there might be a contributing factor, they're going to be more, not just willing, but more, in my mind as a therapist, I would think, oh, this person understands this part about themselves, so it's going to be an easy question to ask. And I will just ask them like, oh, wait, what did you discover? Do you think this links with whatever? Rather than if I think you have no process at all, then I'm thinking as a therapist like, okay, I'm not sure if they realize how much this is a big deal, and that's an entirely different conversation. So we really are, as therapists, actually doing work. Like, it sounds funny to say, but we're trying to respect you in the assessment process the whole time. And so the more information that we have, kind of the better. But I know that some folks will just write their life story, and we don't necessarily need that, by the way, not the whole...
In detail.
And like, yeah, not in detail.
Right, like stay high level about it. And it is really helpful, because there have been many times where people have put down some information in that intake document, and I've gone over the assessment with them and gathered all this information. And then whether it's 6 months down the road or 2 years down the road, they share something else. And I will go back to that intake paperwork and the first couple of session notes, and I'll read and I'll think, man, that wasn't shared. That this piece of information was not a part of that initial assessment. And now that it comes out, it's like, this is kind of a big deal. Sometimes it's because the client didn't share and they didn't feel comfortable sharing, which again, that's the kind of the point here, is I understand that it's hard to share that stuff, but it's relevant because it does change the course of our treatment. And sometimes it's because the person didn't realize that that was a big deal, or didn't realize that was a thing in their life that could have had anything to do with why they're here, which, no fault of their own, but then they bring it up and then it's like, oh, that happened. And they're like, what do you mean? And I'm like, that makes a difference. And they're like, really? So again, this is why a good assessment matters. And an ongoing assessment is kind of what I'm trying to say too. Along with that is assessment doesn't just start and stop in the first few sessions. Good therapy, we just talked about this in our previous episode, so I'm kind of following up with this. Good therapy is ongoing assessment. You don't stop being curious about the person, the client, what's going on. If they say something that you're like, wait, what? What is that all about? Maybe they go to a family event or whatever, and you hear about something and you're like, oh, this is stuff I have not heard about, and this could be related to what we're talking about. You might kind of open up some doors of assessment, quote unquote, for a session where you're finding more about all this family that's, that you're visiting. Like, oh, tell me about what happened and what are these relationships like? And that can also be really helpful for the process as well, because now it's not just you and these things that you've experienced, but it's like, oh, there's maybe a whole generational pattern of stuff that's going on in your family. So we're not just dealing with you, but we're dealing with generations of stuff.
Right. And and kind of heading for home here, but we have to talk about this piece real quick. Is there are cultural components to stuff that comes up that's actually not necessarily intuitive by you as a normal person. One example, I worked with a person, it was a long time ago. They'd put down on the intake form that they had been spanked, which is like no big deal. I mean, that it's culturally relevant, right? So if their culture of growing up in the families and it was pretty normal for spanking to happen, okay. I mean, it's generally just a discipline and you move on. The problem is when it becomes more like birthed in rage and being demeaning and all that kind of stuff, right? So this person was older, so I kind of thought, yeah, that's probably makes sense or whatever. So as we get into stuff and he's dealing with shame and different things that are going on, I start to realize like he's got kind of like a real strong cowering type of effect that's also combined with anger outwards, right? So I'm thinking like physical abuse, quite frankly. So I ask him like more about this whole spank thing. It turns out his dad would make him go out in the backyard and cut his own switch. And so what he would do, because he learned quick as a kid, is don't cut the thin ones, you cut the big ones, because the big ones don't whip and cut you, right? And it's like, this is insane. I'm sitting there thinking like, glad I asked that question, but because on the one hand, the culture makes sense, but on the other hand, it wasn't even appropriate for that scenario and was still having an effect on his physiology. It's a very specific example, I guess, overall, but I use it because it's like, one, I don't even remember this person that well, to be honest. They're a long time ago, so I know I'm not, breaking anything. Two, I realize that some of you guys really like the specifics on some stuff, I can think, because it's kind of like interesting. And three, I think it explains what we're talking about overall with the old assessment.
So why does a good assessment matter? Because there's information in there that's powerful, that's relevant, that's probably key to helping us help you get where you want to be and to feel better.
Have a great day, folks.
Wow, dude, you were coffeed up that episode.
Mm-hmm.
Woo! I was like, man.
I know.
Ooh, breathe.
I kind of like it.
What?
I kind of like it.
I bet you do.
I bet
Oh my
you
god, I
do.
got 5 minutes.
Actually,
okay.
I realized it about 10, 15 minutes ago. I was like, oh my gosh.
Man.
But I also felt like at the end, I felt like I was in a hurry.